Chapter 627. Late into the night, Cynthia could vaguely sense the deep pain and helplessness inside Admiral Amirius's heart. Without speaking further, she hugged him tightly and used her company to calm his mood. After a simple dinner, Klein took a hot bath and entered the quietest guest room once again. He got into bed and stared at the ceiling in a daze. Klein knew that with him having fully immersed himself in the character of Admiral Amirius's helplessness towards fate and the pain he needed to hide had resonated with his past experiences. If I hadn't figured out the concept of getting into character and being detached, then I might have lost myself. Heh, this is like some actors in my past life. They get too into character and are unable to detach themselves from it, causing them to suffer from mental problems. And to a beyonder, mental problems might end up magnified. As Klein wallowed in his gloom, he got to learn what kind of person he was. I never expected that a Navy admiral who enjoys a high standing, a demigod saint, would still be faced with such helpless and painful experiences. Strength can bring abundance, but it's not a solution to everything. Everyone wears masks, and this is the truest side of a demigod. Klein watched as the crimson moonlight turned brighter, dyeing all the furniture in the room red. At that moment, through the resonating feelings with Admiral Amirius's experience and the contrasting differences, as well as the experience from his previous acting, Klein established a more multifaceted and realistic image of Amirius. He also gained a clearer picture of his blurry self. A person who's very sentimental, a person from Earth, but to a certain extent, a person who has been reconstructed into a new person because of the fusion with Klein Moretti's memory fragments. A person who didn't spend too much time with the Nighthawks but has had that period of time deeply influence his actions and choices. A person who tries to play safe and is afraid of danger but is able to change his mind at the critical moment. A person who truly wants to skive, eat delicious food, travel and enjoy life, but he has no choice but to be busy with more important matters. A person who likes beautiful women, but he doesn't give himself up to pleasure to keep to his principles. A person who loves money but is willing to spend large sums of money for his siblings. A person who hides his pain inside while showing a smile to others. A person who's used to lampooning inwardly but appears gentlemanly on the surface. A person who can overcome his psychological traumas but never crosses his bottom line. A person who feels embarrassed for his acting. He's also a guardian, a miserable wretch that is constantly fighting against threats and madness. The corners of Klein's mouth curled up as he silently added. These thoughts flashed through his mind as he seemed to come into contact with his true self. Without realizing it, Klein fell asleep, his body and mind at peace. Inside the master bedroom, Cynthia had also fallen asleep. She was dressed in a nightgown with her legs bare. She had a few layers of her blanket in between her legs as she gently grinded against them. Her hands subconsciously scratched her skin, forming red streaks across them as tiny bumps were produced. In her dream, she saw the illusory and surreal sea of stars, as well as that bright star that emitted its light at her. Her vision was pulled closer to it as she could slowly discern the star. Phew! Klein suddenly awoke from his dream as he still had an indescribable scene still seemingly burned into his eyes. Why did I have such a dream? He frowned as he turned his head in disbelief. Just now, not only had he dreamed of Cynthia, who was dressed in a silk nightgown, but he also had a sexual relationship with her. He even dreamed of the naked body of Demoness of Pleasure Sharon, the exquisite doll-like Miss Sharon, Miss Justice whose looks were relatively blurry, Trissy Cheek, Tracy, and all the beautiful women he had met before. Then, he gave himself up to pleasure as he engaged in a myriad of positions. To most beyonders and ordinary people, this might have been a normal response from suppressing his body when recently faced with temptation, but as a seer, a dream had a very special meaning. Klein quickly observed his body and realized he was still erect, semen flooding out from his penis and causing stains everywhere. This isn't a seer's dream revelation, but the result of an external influence. There's an enemy. Klein was alarmed as he quickly made up his mind. At the same time, he cautiously got out of bed and quickly changed into his admiral uniform. This way, he had the 9th law charm and creeping hunger on him, equipping him with potent self-preservation powers. As he wasn't clear of the present situation, Klein didn't attempt to head above the gray fog. He continued viewing himself as Amirius. With a staid expression, Klein carefully walked to the door and reached out his hand to grab the handle. At that instant, he seemed to finally find the connection with the real world as he heard the chaos and din outside the door. There were clear chewing sounds, debaucherous moaning, angry roaring, and sharp urging. What exactly happened? Everything was normal just moments ago. Klein gulped a mouthful of saliva as he used cogitation to maintain the necessary calm. He had been using spirit vision to observe the situation outside the villa every day and had not discovered any problems. Where are the Admiral's bodyguards? Where's Secretary Luan? Klein found the entire ordeal strange and terrifying the more he considered the situation before him. He touched the ninth law charm with one hand and made the deep domineering aura emanate, repressing the unease that was wafting through the air. Exerting strength in his left hand, Klein twisted the handle and opened the door. Before he took a step forward, he saw a red-vested attendant sitting opposite him. The attendant had many cooked and raw food placed in front of him. There was steak, mutton, dragon bone fish, and Oravi lobster. At this moment, the attendant picked up a huge fish that seemed to have just stopped struggling, raised his head, and smiled at Klein with a turbid look. "Admiral, I have always envied your food." His stomach was different from before. It was bloated as though he was 7 or 8 months pregnant. Just as he said that, the attendant raised his arms and bit into the raw dragon bone fish, forcefully ripping out a piece of thick flesh. Fresh red blood dribbled from the corners of his mouth as his chewing sound sent a chill down Klein's back. The attendant hurriedly gulped as he swallowed the food in his mouth. His bloated stomach trembled as though he would blow up at any moment. This is the instinctive reaction to restrict one's appetite. Klein observed the attendant carefully, and for some reason, he recalled the tramp stand-in who had died of a sudden illness due to gorging. He didn't spend too much time thinking or making attempts to rescue the attendant who was ravenously consuming the food. This was because he knew that nothing would be effective unless he resolved the matter at its roots. Klein moved his feet and followed his spiritual intuition's guidance, carefully walking towards the master bedroom. At the door, there were 2 maidservants. One of them was sitting on the other as she bent her back, strangling the other by the neck. Wearing a beaming smile, she shook the maidservant beneath her as she hurriedly urged her. Quickly praise me. Quickly praise me. She desires acknowledgement." Klein frowned and took a few steps closer, grabbing onto the collar of the maidservant at the very top. He threw the maidservant to the other side of the wall, slamming her to the wall with a force strong enough to make anyone faint. However, this didn't prevent the maidservant from getting to her feet. The maidservant at the bottom kept yawning without opening her eyes. Even though her neck was being wrangled, she appeared as though she hadn't had enough sleep. Such a scene. Klein instantly had the urge to escape and seek help from the church or military. However, the strongest person on Oravi Island was none other than Admiral Emirius. And I'm Emirius at the moment. However, once the situation turns for the worse, I should flee when the time calls for it. I shouldn't act at the cost of my life. Klein pushed open the ajar master bedroom door, his scalp tingling with numbness. The first thing he heard behind the door was pleasurable moaning that gave itself up to one's primal instincts. Following that, a smell that made his heart race and sent blood gushing to his nether regions inundated his olfactory senses. In addition, there was an eclectic mix of all sorts of bodily fluids. A scene of indulging pleasure couldn't help but surface in Klein's mind right on the heels of that. Klein saw the blonde secretary, Luan. He stood by the door, looking inside with an overlooking and cold manner. His arrogance was extremely real. Upon sensing someone enter, he turned his head and discovered it was Admiral Emirius. His expression and gaze didn't change, as though he was looking at an ordinary, unimportant person. This secretary is usually very reverent, but he's actually such a prideful person? Klein originally wanted to question Luan, who seemed to possess some reason, but he saw him shift his gaze to look into the middle of the master bedroom from a height. He only looks normal. Klein traced Luan's gaze and discovered a fair body that was 3 meters tall in the middle of the master bedroom. It had brownish-green lumps growing on its surface that resembled tree warts. Some parts were cracked open, revealing organs that resembled flowers. It had the bodyguards and the male attendants gathered around it as they either stood or knelt, prostrating or floating as they mated with those organs, letting out deep grunting sounds. The other bodyguards and maidservants of varying numbers were scattered across the carpet, enjoying each other's bodies to their heart's content. In addition, tree warts and flowers grew from the tall fair body, as well as brown branches, that extended out as they participated in every promiscuous act of pleasure with the people present. What kind of monster is this? Klein had his knowledge of mysticism overturned once again. He lowered his left palm and prepared for battle. At this moment, the terrifying body which towered 3 meters tall turned a head over. It was a female. She had blonde hair and blue eyes. She had a high nose bridge and plump lips. She was none other than the beautiful Cynthia with hints of her youthfulness. As the tree branches danced while the flowers opened, Cynthia looked down at Klein with flushed cheeks as she said with hints of embarrassment, "Admiral, I want to have a child with you." Chapter 628. Prohibition. Upon seeing Cynthia's huge fair body with tree warts and flowers growing on it as though she was a tree, as well as hearing her shy, reluctant request, Klein couldn't help but shudder as his hair stood on end. Such a scene exceeded a horror conceivable by human imagination. He had never encountered something like this even in his dreams. If he were himself back when facing Megos in Tingen, Klein definitely would have been affected by such a scene. He would have temporarily lost his ability to react due to the horror and panic, but after experiencing so much, he was an experienced beyonder in the true sense of the word. In the moment that Cynthia's words entered his ears, the glove on his left hand had already changed colors. It had turned black, emitting a noble and sinister feeling. This meant that Klein had activated creeping hunger and had switched to worm-tongue Mither soul, giving him the powers of a baron of corruption. At that instant, he distorted Cynthia's words, turning "Admiral, I want to have a child with you," to "Admiral, I only wish to have a child with you." This way, Klein believed that the bodyguards and male attendants around the tree-like monster would be pushed away, far away by Cynthia, after having her will distorted, giving them a chance for a breather. As for whether he would expose himself as a fake Admiral Emerius, he didn't care. At this moment, anyone who was still bothered about whether the true acting would be successful would definitely be someone with a serious case of obsessive-compulsive disorder, and he clearly wasn't. In addition, in an environment with all sorts of desires being magnified to the limit, Klein suspected that the others who had been influenced weren't paying attention to the battle or the actual situation. The Baron of Corruption's distortion power was activated silently, but Klein was appalled to discover that nothing changed with Cynthia or the men's actions. They weren't affected at all. "I've already used distortion. The mutated Cynthia is able to directly resist such an influence." Klein's pupils constricted as he hurriedly jumped to the side. A brown tree branch sprouted out from where he was standing as a sticky flower bloomed at its tip. The flower was abnormally large. As it bloomed, it seemed like it was about to swallow a person whole. Although Klein had never seen cannibalistic flowers in the southern continent's rainforests, he didn't believe that they were any less terrifying or ridiculous as the one before him. Pa, pa, pa. Similar branches drilled out from the walls, floor, and ceiling as they chased after Klein with their moist flowers. During this process, the flowers bit down on Secretary Luan's head, as well as the bodyguards, male attendants, and maidservants who were gyrating in pleasure on the surrounding carpet. At this moment, having learned the lesson that his distortion powers would be resisted, Klein didn't hesitate to pull out his right hand, a dark gold high-level charm clasped tightly in his palm. Ninth Law. He originally didn't plan on using the charm so quickly. It wasn't because he couldn't bear to use it, but he wished to engage in a longer battle to determine what Cynthia was good at after mutating into a monster. Only then could he target her weaknesses. After all, the Ninth Law was unable to make a general prohibition, and the clause had to be sufficiently specific. For example, it couldn't make Beyonder powers ineffective in the area, but it could specify the nullification of a specific Beyonder power. To use it to its fullest, he needed to observe carefully and make sound judgment. However, the present situation was forcing Klein to use his trump card. Otherwise, he suspected that he had no means of damaging this tree-like monster. If the Ninth Law charm isn't able to create an environment that allows me to kill the monster, I'll have to immediately escape from the villa with its help. I will lead Cynthia outside and find a chance to prey. I'll use the sea god scepter above the grey fog to bombard it with attacks. Just as the thought flashed in his mind, Klein, who had been constantly jumping amidst the attacking tree branches and flowers, solemnly chanted a word in ancient Hermes. Law. As the activation incantation resounded, the dark gold charm in Klein's palm instantly turned ice cold. It was a coldness that seemed to make one lose any emotions. At that instant, Klein reached an extremely calm state. In the moment he threw out the Ninth Law charm, his thoughts rapidly surfaced as he considered what to prohibit. His first reaction was to prohibit the generation of any desire, but he knew that it was too general. Therefore, he thought of changing to the desire to procreate. After all, Cynthia's desire was to have a child with Admiral Emerius. The influence she had on her surroundings was a result of this. Just as the Ninth Law charm was flying in midair, turning into bits of dark gold beams of light that scattered into the surroundings, Klein suddenly thought of a problem. Cynthia was only an ordinary person prior to this. This is a certain fact. Over the past 3 nights, Klein had used spirit vision, divination, and other methods to repeatedly confirm that Cynthia wasn't a beyonder. Similarly, she would have long been discovered by Admiral Emerius, who could distinguish between ordinary people and beyonders. Therefore, her sudden transformation into a mutated monster was a problem he needed to pay close attention to. Could it be like Magos? She became a vessel of an evil god's descent through some form of ritual? No, if there's a ritual, it's impossible for me not to discover it. My spiritual intuition would have warned me not to activate my spirit vision and not look straight at Cynthia. It's some item or trait on her body that has an external force projected on her. Therefore, there weren't any problems the previous 2 nights until she suddenly mutated today. Regardless, the terror from her comes from somewhere else and not her body. Klein quickly made a judgment in 2 seconds. Without any hesitation, he seized the opportunity and said in a solemn tone, "This place is prohibited from having any interaction with the outside world." The ancient Hermes' words, which were filled with mystery, instantly spread out as the dark golden light scattered everywhere and intertwined with the countless law-like symbols and magic labels before merging into the void. Hum. There was suddenly a light hum in Klein's ears as he seemed to see the formless light filled with desire get expelled out of the room. Immediately following that, an illusory and resplendent starry sky appeared before his eyes. They were points of bright stars. Pa! Pa! Klein's eyes burst as fluid, a mixture of blood and plasma, gushed out horrendously. Although he had used the 9th law charm to isolate any external influence, the level of the power was extremely high. Just a normal level of recoil was enough to penetrate the natural protection of the high-level charm and burst his eyes. This damage came abruptly and without any warning signs. Klein didn't even have the chance to use paper figurine substitutes, just like nimble right Master Rosago from back then. If not for the 9th law charm, his eyes might not have been the only things that burst. He might have turned into a monster just like Cynthia. Meanwhile, the tree-like Cynthia came to a stop as her body began crumbling, turning into flesh and blood with brownish-green warts. The surrounding bodyguards and male attendants plopped to the ground, unconscious. Cynthia's head was embedded in the blob of flesh as she muttered to herself, "Admiral, I want to have a child with you. Admiral, I want to have a child with you." She tried hard to extend the remaining tree branches on the ceiling and walls, binding Klein, who was still in a dazed state as a result of the recoil, and she pulled him towards herself. The moment Klein recovered a little, he immediately began struggling desperately. Despite his attempts to snap his fingers to light a fire or switch the powers of creeping hunger, he failed because his hands and arms were bound tightly. With the help of his clown powers, he saw the brownish-green warts approach. Stirred, Klein changed his appearance, turning his appearance from Admiral Emerius to Gehrman Sparrow, a Gehrman Sparrow with bleeding eyes. The binding tree branches paused as they mysteriously released their hold. They began flailing everywhere as though in an attempt to grab at something. Cynthia's head was filled with disappointment and confusion as she muttered, "Admiral, where did you go? Admiral, where did you go?" Without the external force to continue the resistance, she finally only had the thoughts of having a child with Emerius thanks to the Baron of Corruption's distortion. This made her release Gehrman Sparrow. Klein flipped to his feet and covered his eyes with his right hand and pulled downwards abruptly, moving the horrendous wound towards his left shoulder. As his left shoulder became mangled, creeping hunger was tainted with a pure and resplendent glow. Klein looked at Cynthia's head in the pile of flesh and blood with pity as he spread out his arms. A holy flame which swirled around a pillar of pure light descended from the sky, enveloping the monster that had been reduced to flesh and blood. Chapter 629. Heavenly body sect amidst the holy beam of light, having already lost its support from the external power, the tree warts and flesh rapidly disintegrated. It was like snow meeting a red-hot metal ball. Amidst an indescribable sizzling sound, Cynthia's face winced as abnormal agony showed itself on her face. She turned around with great difficulty, looking up and down, her expression turning horrified and confused. Finally, she realized that there was a problem with her. "Admiral!" Her voice trembled as she looked ahead with fear and despair, but all she could find was an unfamiliar face. Klein could have fed creeping hunger with Cynthia's remnant flesh and spirit body, but at that moment, he sighed and said with a calm voice, "Try not to make contact with strange artifacts or religions in the future." From his point of view, the reason why Cynthia had turned into this monstrosity either had to do with a cult or some particularly dangerous artifact. She had connected with some existence which couldn't be looked at directly, resulting in such a response. Cynthia seemed to understand something as her remnant head and tiny bit of flesh suddenly wept. It's the mother tree of desire, the heavenly body sect. Admiral, Admiral, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. Save me. Save me. Mother tree of desire. Heavenly body sect. This isn't within the confines of my knowledge of mysticism. Klein maintained his expression as he looked pitifully at the pleading Cynthia. He spread his arms again and said in a deep voice, "Death is not the end. You will be redeemed when you are at God's side." Another pure beam of light landed as Cynthia's beautiful weeping face completely fixed in place. Her eyes widened in despair, but there was the remnant hope of being sent to heaven after death. Under the sun's radiance, her brain and remnant flesh melted away at a discernible pace. By vanishing, it had obtained its final rite of cleansing. Klein looked silently at this scene without any expression or movement. After everything calmed down, he curled the corner of his lips and chuckled, finding it hard to hide his sorrow. This is really a crazy and chaotic world. He didn't dare to channel Cynthia's spirit after what had happened. The many oddities had made him abandon the thought of bringing Cynthia's spirit body above the gray fog to inquire. Faced with the irremovable evil and the ever-worsening corruption, he could only choose to have Cynthia be cleansed. After all, in this world with true gods, there might exist a heaven after death. As for creeping hunger's backlash, Klein was temporarily not concerned. After spending a long time with it, this mystical item which had been sealed to a certain extent had adjusted to him. It didn't need to be fed after every use. It had been restored to its original state. Once it was activated, it just needed to eat once in a 24-hour period, regardless of how many times it was used. Of course, there was no need for it to be fed on the day it wasn't used. Therefore, Klein had plenty of time to seek out food for creeping hunger without harming the innocent. If the worst comes to the worst, I can throw it above the gray fog. Klein surveyed his surroundings, and he realized that the bodyguards and the male and female attendants in the room had shaken off the influence of their magnified desires, and they had fallen unconscious. This included the maidservant who was strangling her companion in a bid to obtain her approval and praise, as well as blonde secretary, Luan. Indeed, once the problem is resolved at its root, everything will come to an end. According to Admiral Emirius's description, Luan is at least a sequence 6 beyonder, and he's suspected to be a baron of corruption. He might have secretly reached sequence 5. Even he was so easily controlled by his magnified desires, which means that the power that descended with the help of Cynthia is extremely potent. But why did I only have a wet dream? Ignoring my mystical items, Luan and I should be at the same level. Is it because a portion of the gray fog's power, when mixed with reality, provided me with help? Is it because of the restriction from Admiral Emirius's temporary contract? Or could it be a mix of both? Yes, if it wasn't because of these factors, as Cynthia's primary target, my desire towards sex would definitely be magnified. This wouldn't just be me having a romantic dream. Klein habitually reached out with his right hand to cover his face as he changed once again back into Emirius Revolt's appearance. As the lives of the others weren't temporarily under threat, he carefully observed the room when his spiritual perception was suddenly triggered. Taking a few steps forward, Klein came to where Cynthia had vanished. He bent down and picked up a necklace from a pile of torn clothes on the bed. A pendant that was the length of a finger segment hung from the necklace. It was completely black in color and looked like a miniaturized rhinoceros horn. Its surface was full and covered in cracks. Apart from exuding evil, there were no lustrous spirituality activity. This is the dangerous item that caused Cynthia to mutate? As it had connected to the existence which couldn't be looked at directly, it had completed its mission, allowing all its powers to be injected into Cynthia's body? Klein made a preliminary conjecture based on the pendant situation and from his past experience. He checked the area and found nothing. Hence, he pulled out a paper figurine and dealt with the traces left behind. He dispelled the prohibition from the charm before walking towards Secretary Luan, who still had some signs of corruption due to temporarily being devoured by the flowers. He raised his knee and kicked him a few times with the tip of his shoe. With Emirius's character, it's unlikely that he would crouch down to shake his secretary awake. Heh, this fellow's arrogant way of looking down on others sure is irritating. I really want to beat him up. Klein paused as he watched sternly as Luan gradually woke up. Your Excellency. Luan was in a momentary daze, as though he couldn't tell dream from reality. As a high-ranking superior, I'm under no obligation to explain. Klein looked down at him and said in a deep voice, "Wake up all the lightly injured people. Get a number of them to treat the remaining people while the others are to investigate the heavenly body sect on Oravi Island. They worship an evil god named Mother Tree of Desire. Start the investigation with the people around Cynthia. I'll be waiting in the study for the report." With that said, he held the cracked rhinoceros horn pendant and turned to leave the master bedroom before entering the unaffected silent study. As an important member of the military, although he was somewhat helpless when faced with the kingdom's upper echelons, he needed to choose to ignore certain matters. An example was the telegram which relieved Aston from his post as Governor-General and the arrival of the new Governor-General. This meant that the new Governor-General had departed ahead of time. Yet as the highest-ranking commander of the Central Sonia Seas Navy, Emerius Revolt had not received the news at all. However, on Oravi Island, to Secretary Luan and the local police system and naval base personnel, he still held absolute authority. He didn't need to do the investigations himself, as he had plenty of people at his disposal. A demigod only needed to be wary against any accidents and await news. There was no need to busy themselves. Inside the study, as Klein heard the chaotic sound of footsteps and horrified screams, questioning and exchanges, he couldn't help but have the starry sky and the bright lustrous star surface in his mind. What does it represent? Klein frowned and sat in the armchair behind the desk. His figure sank into the darkness brought about by the curtains. He soon made certain connections. Due to the legends from the City of Silver and Emlyn White's description of the Sanguine situation, he confirmed that the moon pathway controlled a portion of the authority over reproduction and proliferation. This coincided with Cynthia's intentions and actions. A starry sky. Mr. Dorr informed Emperor Roselle that the goddess's corresponding tarot card is the star and not the moon. Could it be that this illusory starry sky represents her? Yes, the primordial moon is suspected to be a particular deity, angel, or high-level devil's alternate identity. The goddess has the honorific name of Crimson Moon. Could she be the one passing herself off as the primordial moon and occupying the corresponding spot, so as to control the required authority? Although Klein knew that such thoughts were sacrilegious, he couldn't help but suspect the Evernight goddess. But he soon rejected that conjecture. This was because, be it vampire ancestor Lilith or the primordial moon, what they projected was only reproduction and proliferation. It didn't include the recognition of gluttony, pride, and desire. This was at odds with a number of victims earlier. The other honorific titles of the Evernight goddess didn't include the corresponding domains. This does coincide with the traits of the devil pathway. A desire apostle is an expert in such matters. Could the one subjugating the primordial moon be a high-level devil, or even the king of devils who's known as the dark side of the universe, Sequence Zero Abyss? This is very possible, but the problem with this is that it shouldn't produce an illusory starry sky and bright stars. Be it moon or abyss, they have nothing to do with the corresponding symbols. Klein found his conjecture problematic the more he thought over the matter. Amidst his thoughts, he suddenly thought of a concept. It was something important back when he was first educated in mysticism but had never received a detailed description or explanation. That was the astral world. Apart from the Life School of Thought and a few other organizations' belief in uncommon concepts such as the world of absolute rationality, most schools of thought and mysticism believed that the world was comprised of the real world, the spirit world, and the astral world. There was no need to explain the real world. Knowledge of the spirit world was the foundation of many ritualistic magic and beyonder powers. It was only the astral world where Klein's knowledge about it was basically zero. Therefore, the illusory starry sky represents the astral world. The bright star is a particular existence in the astral world? I've always suspected that the astral world is where the true gods reside. Then, this imagery which represents the primordial moon isn't something unacceptable. Klein didn't think further as he recalled the details of the past few days while awaiting the results of his subordinates' investigations. Time ticked by when Klein finally heard a familiar gate approach. Secretary Luan knocked before entering. He bowed his head and coldly reported, "Your Excellency, we've already found the Heavenly Body sect and captured their leader." It was a clue provided by Miss Cynthia's parents. This sect has been rather active in Oravi over the past few years. They do not wear clothes, in a bid to return to nature. Giving themselves up to their instincts is their purpose, and they believe that humans can attain liberation of their spirituality in such states. Reproduction of the next generation is a subsidiary product of this belief. After pausing for a moment, Luan added, "Their leader is a Beyonder, a Sequence 8 lunatic." Lunatic? A lunatic from the prisoner pathway. Chapter 630. Timeline. The leader of the Naturism sect was named Flight Ken, a man in his 30s. His thin face had brown whiskers, and there were evil-looking tattoos on his neck. He was brought in front of Klein by Luan. He looked ragged, as though he had suffered the most severe mental torture. "Your Excellency," while he was being captured, he kept exchanging his intelligence for strength, and he's on the brink of a mental collapse. Luan reported the facts, ignoring the possibility that Admiral Emerius could tell the exact details. That's perfect. Klein had been previously worried that, as a lunatic, Flight Ken would refuse to answer his questions while under the mental pressure. That way, he had to take the risk of being suspected of dismissing his subordinates and attempting a spirit channeling. As he looked coldly at Flight Ken, Klein's left hand wore a golden luster under the cover of the desk. He had switched creeping hunger to the interrogator's soul. And interrogator happened to be Sequence 7 of Admiral Emerius's arbiter pathway. Deep in Klein's eyes, two indistinct flashes of lightning appeared as they overlapped with Flight Ken's figure. Psychic piercing was poised for attack. However, Klein didn't directly use the Beyonder power, as it was only at the level of a Sequence 7. Once he used it in front of Luan, he would immediately expose himself to the blonde secretary. With the pressure provided by psychic piercing on Flight Ken's spirit body, Klein sat there like the real Admiral Emerius as he said in a deep voice, "Do you know Cynthia?" As he spoke, he raised his right hand high and dangled the black miniature rhinoceros horn from his palm. "What is its use?" The dispirited Flight Ken trembled as he felt as if a dagger was being held to his psyche, capable of penetrating him at any moment. He couldn't help but lower his head as he stammered, "Yes, I know her. Cynthia. Miss Cynthia wished to have a child with your Excellency, a child with Beyonder powers. She was introduced to me by her parents. It's a proliferation necklace created with the bestowment of the goddess's aura. By consuming its powder and wearing it for prolonged periods of time, it will be able to make your Excellency unable to resist her." Klein listened in silence as he was half convinced by Flight Ken's explanation. However, he still had his doubts. He believed that it was partially Cynthia's goal. This beautiful lady did wish to have a child with Admiral Emerius, either by her own will or from the urging of others. This could be seen from her persistence even after she mutated. Although the Lone Kingdom's aristocrats didn't like or even discriminated against their illegitimate children, it was situational. A child who had successfully inherited their father's Beyonder characteristics would similarly be given importance. Those ancient families who knew many secrets viewed this with importance, and the Revolt family was one of those families. Furthermore, Admiral Emerius is a stern and old-fashioned man on the surface, but he's someone who treasures his relationships. Even an illegitimate child would receive his love and have importance attached. This might be the real reason why Cynthia was eager to have his child. Klein sighed inwardly. The doubt towards Flight Ken's answer was concentrated on the true effects of the proliferation necklace, as well as the possibility of the Naturism sect deliberate misleading of Cynthia. As he strengthened the pressure brought about by psychic piercing, Klein silently stared into Flight Ken's eyes until he could no longer take it and bowed his head again. "What other uses does this necklace have?" Klein shook the cracked pendant. His tone was calm, as though he knew every secret. His questions were only to obtain the final confirmation. An indescribable pressure inundated Flight Ken, who was already on the brink of a mental collapse. He plopped to the ground and shouted nearly hysterically, "It can corrupt you." As long as Cynthia consumed the powder ground from it and sincerely chanted Mother Tree of Desire's honorific name, any man who has sex with her and successfully has a child would be corrupted. That will make you become a believer of the Mother Tree of Desire. To become her blessed. So that's how it is. Klein instantly understood the entire story, and he was no longer puzzled by the mutation that happened that very night. The Naturism sect's goal is to use Cynthia and the proliferation necklace, which looks like an ordinary object, to corrupt Admiral Emerius, making this important military figure of the Lone Kingdom become the Mother Tree of Desire's devout believer. He can then help their sect develop and provide them protection. The key to the success of this method is that it's sufficiently concealed and normal. It is in no way directly connected to terms like potency, strike, and terrifying. Therefore, after 3 rejections from me, Cynthia was unable to expel the corruptive forces in the proliferation necklace's powder from her body. She gradually reached her limit and finally connected with the mother tree of desire and ended up with what seemed like a sudden mutation. Therefore, the monster after the mutation wasn't able to pose any threat to the real Admiral Emerius. Even my usage of the ninth law charm easily resolved the matter. This is because this wasn't the outcome the Naturism sect wished to have. They wished to have Admiral Emerius be secretly corrupted, and not have a conflict with a demigod. Klein silently looked at the secretary Luan. Luan had also gained a rough understanding of the entire situation. He immediately lowered his head and said in a deep voice, "Your Excellency, it was our oversight. We only monitored Miss Cynthia and the servants here without expanding the monitoring to their friends and family. I'm willing to accept any punishment for this, even if you send me to be court-martialed." How would the real Admiral reply? Klein once again immersed himself in the character of Emerius, experiencing his recent pain, helplessness, grief, and anger. He maintained his seating posture and sternly said, "We shall leave this for later." The hidden meaning behind this sentence meant, "I'll decide based on your upcoming performance." Luan was taken aback for a second, seemingly finding the Admiral's mild punishment unbelievable. Klein half closed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "My father, the deceased Earl Revolt, once taught me this. He said to pardon the first mistake of a subordinate. Luan, you, as well as the other bodyguards, should be thankful for his benevolence." Luan's gaze shimmered as he drew a silent breath. He was no longer as calm as he rather earnestly said, "Your benevolence is admirable. I pledge my utmost loyalty to you, apart from my principles, God and kingdom." "The pride in you is extremely exaggerated." Klein didn't believe him as he said seemingly calm, "There's a second half of the saying, that is, punish them for their second mistake." Luan nodded, unsurprised at that. Klein cast his gaze back to Flight Ken, who was slumped on the ground. He pressed without a change in expression, "Who instigated you to do this?" From his point of view, Flight Ken's answer was likely that they had planned it. After coming into contact with Cynthia and learning of her requests and knowing who her lover was, the Naturism sect boldly had the idea of corrupting the naval admiral, Emerius. Flight looked left and right somewhat neurotically as he apprehensively said, It was the mother tree of desire. She instigated me to do it in my dream. In the beginning, I only wanted to lend Cynthia the proliferation necklace and for her to wear it. I never planned on her consumption of the powder." Instigated by the mother tree of desire? This is almost equivalent to a revelation. Klein nearly frowned. Although Admiral Emerius is an important figure of the lone military and the highest-ranking commander of the Central Sonia Sea, making his standing and power rather tremendous, it shouldn't be important enough to have an evil goddess set her sights on him. However, I'm not an evil god. I have no way of comprehending their thought process. Perhaps the corruption of Emerius is for subsequent plans. Yes, I can't eliminate the possibility that Flight Ken is lying. I'll have to confirm it later. Klein thought before sternly asking, "When did you have this dream?" Flight forced a smile filled with fear and said, It was nighttime on February 4th last Friday. I remember it very clearly. I had just released The Spirituality of a Lady. 4th February. Klein ruminated over the date, momentarily unable to find anything special about it. After 2 seconds of silence, he turned to ask, "What relationship do you have with the Rose School of Thought? What relationship does the Mother Tree of Desire have with the Chained God?" He wasn't worried that Admiral Emerius might have already known of this, with Secretary Luan having a certain understanding of the matter. This could be easily understood as a confirmation question. Flight Ken revealed a passionate look he could hardly keep in. We're a branch of the Rose School of Thought. My mentor is the Rose School of Thought Saint, Zatwin. The Chained God is another manifestation of the Mother Tree of Desire. The Mother Tree of Desire is the true and only deity that surpasses the 7 gods and the true creator. Your Excellency, you are a candidate to be her blessed. Who can't brag? Can it be understood that the Mother Tree of Desire is an alt of the Chained God? According to the evil spirit in the underground ruins suspected to be Red Angel Medici, the prisoner path of the divine and the devil pathway can be swapped. Therefore, it's no surprise that the Rose School of Thought's Chained God can magnify the various desires of creatures. They have the temperance and indulgence factions internally. This matches the situation. Klein thought as he turned his head to Luan and said, "Go out for a while." He planned on questioning Flight Ken on whether he had done anything evil, and if he was suitable to be Creeping Hunger's meal. Yes, Your Excellency. Luan didn't ask why as he briskly walked out the study and closed the door behind him. After the echoing sound of the door closing subsided, the entire study suddenly turned quiet. It was as though it was isolated from the outside world. The beyonder powers of a baron of corruption? The distortion of door closing to seal the study? Very considerate. Klein pondered for a few seconds as he recalled the series of thoughts he had previously. Hence, he suddenly asked, February 6th. What did you do on Sunday evening? Flight Ken was taken aback as he said, We followed the revelation given by Mother Tree of Desire, and using the proliferation necklace and a hair obtained from a particular tramp, we held a ritual to magnify the tramp's gluttony. The tramp stand-in meant for Admiral Emirius was indeed killed by you. It was to prevent the Admiral from leaving and, hence, fall into a trap so that he can have sex with Cynthia and end up being corrupted? Klein instantly connected all the matters together. And my appearance provided another possibility that coincidentally destroyed this plan. Coincidence? That's not right. When the words coincidence flashed in his mind, Klein suddenly recalled the peculiarity of February 4th, the day the Mother Tree of Desire gave Flight Ken a dream revelation. It was the first day he arrived on Oravi Island. Chapter 631. 3 days of absence. Don't tell me that this matter was targeted at me? Klein was alarmed as he immediately became abnormally awake. As a person who had several similar experiences, he had quite a persecution complex. It really is possible. The Mother Tree of Desire used a dream to send Flight Ken a revelation just as I arrived at Oravi Island and began an entire series of plans. The first day I met Built Brando was the day the Naturism sect held the ritual to make the tramp stand-in die from gluttony. If they were targeting Admiral Emirius, the plan needed to ensure that there was no lack of a stand-in, and that he couldn't find an additional helper or other means to conceal his departure. But clearly, this is something that cannot be confirmed. My involvement is proof. If the target was me, then the previous problem is explained. Klein used his clown powers to control his facial expression as he gloomily looked at Flight Ken. With such a theory, more questions emerged in his mind. But how were they certain that Built Brando would seek me out? The news of Gehrman Sparrow being able to change into anyone was spread from Vice Admiral Ailment Tracy. It's an element beyond the Mother Tree of Desire's control. Of course, taking a different point of view, it's precisely due to the spreading of this news and my arrival in Oravi Island that made the Mother Tree of Desire send the revelation and put the plan into motion. But why would she want to corrupt me? My grudge with the Rose School of Thought hasn't reached the point of garnering the attention of an evil god. All I did was kill a Sequence 5 Wraith, a Sequence 6 Zombie, and a Sequence 7 Werewolf, with Miss Sharon and Merrick, snatching away the Scarlet Lunar Corona and biological poison bottle. My hunt against Admiral of Blood was terminated before it even started. It was an idea that didn't translate into action. The only thing that happened was the killing of Steel Mavedi. The act of revenge that resulted from this matter shouldn't even exceed the attention of a saint. Was it something special about me that resonated with some item formed by the aura of the Mother Tree of Desire on this island the moment I stepped onto it? But I've never faced any abnormal reactions from the holy artifacts left behind by other deities in Backlund or Tingen City. Furthermore, I did divine the matter above the grey fog and received the revelation that the death of the tramp was solely a coincidence. It wasn't arranged by a legendary creature or Grade 0 sealed artifact, but the outcome ended up different. This is the first time that divination above the grey fog has been disrupted in the true sense of the word? I didn't even notice that it had been disrupted? Klein's thoughts came to a pause as he discovered the most serious problem. Back when the matter involved 0-08, all he received was an ineffective revelation and not a disrupted outcome. Therefore, it's a power that exceeds a Grade 0 sealed artifact? The Mother Tree of Desire personally disrupted the matter, and she is a true deity herself? But it's very difficult for the 7 gods to influence the real world. There has to be a corresponding ritual. Yes, I had also divined the risks of acting as a Mirius above the grey fog, and received a revelation saying that it was an acceptable risk. The outcome does match the development of the situation, so it wasn't disrupted? The more Klein thought about the matter, the more perplexed he became. What was most incomprehensible about it was that if the target of corruption was himself, why didn't he suffer any demanding trials, and he instead solved the problem in a relatively simple manner? This made the Mother Tree of Desire's arrangement appear like a joke. While pondering with this weight in mind, Klein nearly crushed Flight Ken. He asked again to verify his conjecture. To his surprise, the Naturism sect hadn't held any rituals to request the Mother Tree of Desire to disrupt any divination over the past week. They didn't make any special arrangements aimed towards the failure of the project. Strange. Klein took out a gold coin and flicked it as a final confirmation. Even without divination, he was almost certain that Flight Ken wasn't lying. Firstly, the man was already on the brink of a mental collapse, making him lack the ability to fabricate something reasonable. Secondly, Flight Ken's answers adhered to logic, completely confirming whatever Klein had deliberately kept to himself. The gold coin landed in his open palm, the king's portrait facing up, indicating a positive response. Combined with the divination statement, Klein finally confirmed that Flight Ken wasn't lying. After temporarily suppressing his puzzlement, he cast his gaze towards Flight Ken once again. He asked without a smile, "What deeds have you done in the past that violate the kingdom's laws or the moral fabric of society?" Flight Ken was taken aback for a few seconds as his mental state seemed to instantly turn for the better. From his point of view, his ploy against Admiral Emirius was the most serious crime, something that would most easily enrage this important figure. Everything else was trivial and nothing that needed a demigod to waste his time and energy on. Therefore, after skipping the important matters and coming to an ordinary topic, it meant that he might enjoy a good outcome. Flight Ken couldn't help but reveal a discreet smile as he hastened to recount. "I once tortured a family for an entire night for their property and abandoned them in the woods after murdering them. Then, I used fake documents and successfully obtained a sizable amount of wealth. I deliberately enticed many believers to indulge in their desires and watched as their emptiness and regret after the deed slowly paved the way for them to become fertilizer for the Mother Tree of Desire. I once tricked many ladies to abide with their nature, an excuse for them to be redeemed by the spirits, allowing me to possess them. I tortured believers who attempted to renounce the religion, slicing off every part that protruded off their bodies." He recounted each and every sin of his, without any thoughts of concealing the truth. Klein felt disbelief with what he heard. He never expected anyone to be evil to this extent. As Flight Ken got increasingly excited from recounting his past deeds, he saw Admiral Emirius stand up without an expression before circling around the desk and standing in front of him. The Admiral then raised his left palm. A terrifying mouth appeared in the middle of the left palm, revealing 2 rows of illusory, white, and eerie teeth that were icy cold. "No, no." A sharp and horrified scream resounded in the room for a long time until silence prevailed. After a while, Klein bent down to pick up a blob of grayish-white light that resembled a shrunken brain. This was the beyonder characteristic of a lunatic. Unfortunately, Flight Ken had been searched before being brought here. He didn't leave behind any cash or items. Klein snapped his fingers and ignited the rest of the clothes. As he looked at his left shoulder, which was beginning its recovery process, he sat behind the desk and remained silent amidst the dancing scarlet flames. Once the traces were no longer noticeable, he pulled at a corresponding rope, making the bell outside ring. Luan released the restriction and entered, instinctively observing every corner. "Instruct the guards and the base personnel to cooperate with the Oravi police to do a cleanup of the Naturism sect. It's best if clues can be found and a number of Rose School of Thought members are caught," Klein solemnly gave the order. "Yes, Your Excellency," Luan answered respectfully. He didn't ask where Flight Ken was, as though the leader of the Naturism sect never existed. Klein didn't pay too much attention to the raid on Oravi Island. Using the excuse that he was slightly injured, he declined the remaining schedules for the next 2 days. This meant that he didn't need to worry about needing to exude the might of a high-sequence beyonder of the Arbiter pathway after expending the 9th law charm. Nearing noon, Luan entered after knocking the door and reported, "Your Excellency, Mr. Aston has yet to leave on the liner. The new Governor-General, Ben Conrad, has sent an invitation to participate in the banquet he's hosting tonight." Ben Conrad, the person who replaced Aston as Governor-General. According to what I know, Viscount Conrad's family is a loyal subject of the royal family. Talum likely got to know Prince Edisac while being the equestrian teacher of Viscount Conrad's youngest son. Klein nodded gently as he immersed himself in Emirius Revolt's complex emotions. He remained silent for a few seconds before saying, "Inform Governor-General Conrad that it's inconvenient for me to attend the banquet, because of the injuries suffered from the Naturism sect's assault. Apologize to him on my behalf." "Yes, Your Excellency." Luan didn't persuade him otherwise and calmly left the room. A demigod definitely had the right to be willful. As long as he didn't engage in some secret ploy or commit any serious mistake, there was no way he would be blamed regardless of what he did. This was because any faction would be willing to rope in a demigod. As he watched Luan's back vanish from the door, Klein shook his head indiscernibly and sat back behind the desk. A quiet day quickly passed. When it was almost midnight, Klein, who was sleeping in the guest room, suddenly woke up and sat up. His spiritual perception told him that someone had entered the house. Klein focused his gaze at the window and saw a middle-aged man in a tailcoat. He had black hair and blue eyes, with the corners of his mouth slightly sagging. He was none other than Admiral Emerius. Phew! He's finally back. Klein slowly stood up and cautiously asked, "What item did you give me before?" He was afraid that the Admiral Emerius before him was also a faceless in disguise. Admiral Emerius stood there and answered with a stern expression, "The ninth law charm." Without waiting for Gehrman Sparrow to speak again, he took 2 steps forward and calmly asked, "Did anything happen in the past few days?" Klein controlled his facial muscles and said, "Your secretary committed a mistake and was injured." "Oh, what else?" Admiral Emerius nodded with deep reservation. Klein tried hard not to move his gaze away as he looked straight at him and said, "Your younger brother has been relieved of his post as Governor General. The new Governor General has already taken over. Your Miss Cynthia mutated into a monster and was purified by me. A number of your bodyguards and attendants were infected to a certain extent and are currently receiving treatment." Emerius's expression turned into shock bit by bit in an uncontrollable manner. His eyes moved slightly, as though he suspected whether he had returned to the wrong place. It had only been 3 days. Chapter 632. Finishing up after a frozen moment of silence, Emerius quickly brought his expressions under control. He said in a domineering and deep tone, "Tell me the specifics." Klein didn't hide much of the truth. He began with Aston Revolt's question, before mentioning the warning from the mysterious person in the dream, and how he was told not to make a choice that resisted the trend of the times. Following that, he talked about the sudden telegram, and finally he spoke of Cynthia's mutation. He went into detail about the situation, the arrogance of the secretary, how he dealt with it, and the general investigations that followed. The only information he kept to himself was that the February 4th was the first day he arrived on Oravi Island, as well as his subsequent guesses. Of course, he was also very vague with matters regarding combat. He believed that Admiral Emerius was understanding enough. After all, what a Beyonder was good at or what unique abilities he had were one of their greatest secrets. If they were exposed or understood by others, it gave others a chance of setting up a targeted ambush, making it possible for them to die under the hands of an enemy of a lower sequence. Below that of high-sequence Beyonders, many Beyonders could be very powerful or very weak. After Emerius listened to the recount in silence, his expression didn't seem to change in the dark room. However, the fact that he hadn't interrupted Klein's recount implied something. After a few seconds of silence, he asked in a deep voice, "The mysterious person who infiltrated your dream emphasized the fate of an era, as well as the trend of the times?" "Yes." Klein had already changed back into Gehrman Sparrow's appearance. He didn't deliberately go into detail that the mysterious person had never mentioned Aston Revolt's exact plan. Emerius fell silent again. "You maintained my appearance in your dream?" "Yes, this is my secret," Klein answered succinctly. Emerius nodded indiscernibly as he paced around in a tiny area before looking back at Gehrman Sparrow. "There were no problems with your choices." Upon hearing this, Klein seemed to receive the ultimate and most effective feedback. A large portion of the potion in him was digested as a result. Amidst the deep reverberating tone, Emerius turned his body to the side and said without any hint of emotion, "I originally had no plans to have a contract with the stand-in, and instead I wanted to inform Cynthia that I had the symptoms of losing control, making it impossible for me to have any physical relationship with her for 5 days. However, I later changed my mind due to certain reasons. If not for the temporary contract's forceful restriction, even if I'm able to withstand the temptations during usual times, I might not have been able to resist the magnified desires last night. Of course, if Cynthia knew of the 5-day restriction ahead of time, she wouldn't be in such a rush to consume the powder ground from the proliferation necklace. It would have prevented her from sensing the mother tree of desire and end up mutating. But as such, the ball is in the naturism sex court. They could have made up an excuse to get Cynthia to consume it. This matter was really targeted at me. What does the mother tree of desire actually want? Also, What was the reason that caused Admiral Amirius to make such an important change? Klein seemed to grasp the crux of the matter as he looked at Amirius's side profile. What's the reason? Amirius said with a deadpan expression. There's no need for you to know. For the first time in his life, Klein hated such a response. After some thought, he took out the cracked pendant and threw it at Amirius. This is the proliferation necklace that originated from the mother tree of desire. Amirius raised his hand to catch it before looking down. You may leave. Go to Built to receive your reward. Aren't you worried that I know of something I'm not supposed to know? That's right. Aston's ploy has been exposed and is known by his political enemies. As for Amirius, he was clearly not involved. Therefore, it doesn't matter if I understand anything. Klein imagined that there would be a long-term confidential contract, but to his surprise, he could leave just like that. Noticing that Amirius didn't raise another matter, he pointed at him and said, Clothes. Only then did Admiral Amirius look up, silently taking off the formal attire comprised of a shirt and tailcoat. Klein had originally wished to ask for additional payment due to the excessive dangers that went beyond the scope of the original agreement. But after secretly confirming that Cynthia's outcome was because of him, he abandoned the idea while feeling guilty. He quickly took off the comfortable sleeping robe, switched into a tailcoat, and under Amirius's guidance, leaped out of the window, and secretly left the gardened villa while the bodyguard's eyes were confounded. Amirius donned a sleeping robe and clenched the proliferation necklace before walking to the window. He stood there silently as he faced the crimson moon and few stars in the dark night. He stood there without an expression, not even changing his posture for a long period of time. Pah! He slightly relaxed his clenched fist as the miniaturized rhinoceros horn fell to the ground in the form of shattered pieces, bit by bit, fragment by fragment. The next day at noon, Klein, who had slept soundly the entire night, left the inn and took a carriage to Sweet Lemon Bar. He went to the second floor to meet Built Brando. It's over, Built asked with relief and surprise. Klein nodded and said, Admiral Amirius has returned. Where's the rest of the payment? Built revealed an unconcealable smile. After he dismissed his guards, he personally went to a safe and took out the remaining £500 and a blue cufflink. This is the mystical item created from the Murloc bladder you provided, Built introduced. It can provide illusory scales hidden beneath the skin, so you will be as difficult to catch as a fish. It will also help withstand a certain level of damage for you. With it, you can dive to at least 15 meters without any protective gear. You can freely move about in the water for 10 minutes. It doesn't have any serious negative effects. It will just make you tired easily when in a hot or arid place. That means this cufflink shouldn't be used with the sun brooch. Klein extended his hand to collect the money and item. Aren't you afraid that there will be problems? Built cracked a joke. Your business is here, Klein answered calmly. His meaning was clear. If there were any problems, he wasn't afraid that the person in charge would go missing. Built's smile froze as he said, It hasn't been named. You can give it one. Murloc cufflink. Klein couldn't be bothered to waste his brain cells. Nice name. It leaves quite an impression, Built said with a forced smile. He paused for a moment before saying, That artisan said that he can fix the summoning ritual of a spirit world creature onto materials with spirituality. It will be able to last a maximum of 1.5 years, but you will need to provide detailed information. Haha, according to our agreement, I'll be responsible for it, so there's nothing to be worried about. All right. Make it a harmonica. Klein took out a pen and paper from his pocket and scribbled the ritual to summon his messenger. Messenger? This is rather rare. It's very hard for Beyonders not from the death pathway to find a suitable one. Built received the piece of paper and casually scanned it. If the messenger is accidentally summoned during the production process, a gold coin has to be given to her. What happens if it's not given? Heh. Spirit world creatures always have something odd about them. I've seen some who love music, as well as ones who loiter around shit. What happens if you don't give one? Perhaps Ma'am Rionette Tynker might bring the heads of you and the artisan to me. She's a creature with a castle in the spirit world. She might even be stronger than me. Well, under situations when I'm not using the sea god scepter. Klein lampooned as he said in a deep voice, the third promised item can be left to the future. All right. Built didn't have any objections. Following that, he asked out of curiosity, Mr. Gehrman, How did you fool Secretary Luan, Governor General Aston, and Miss Cynthia, people who Admiral Amirius specifically mentioned? Klein did his best to prevent his facial muscles from twitching. Follow the information and think about it carefully. He didn't provide an exact description before he stood up and bowed with his hat. It's time I bid farewell. It was a pleasure working with you, Bilt answered with a smile. After watching Gairman Sparrow's figure vanish behind the door, he shook his head and chuckled, muttering, "This powerful and crazy adventurer is actually a natural actor?" After lunch, his subordinate sent him the day's papers. As Bilt sucked on a cigar, he flipped through it when his expression suddenly froze. Last night, the new Governor-General, Ben Conrad, held a banquet. New Governor-General? Aston Revolt has been relieved of his position as Governor-General? Bilt picked up the other sets of newspapers and found the same piece of information. With his connections in Orovie, he should have long heard of news regarding a replacement of the Governor-General. However, the replacement was extremely sudden. Most people only learned of the situation when the new Governor-General officially made his appearance. After a while, a partner who was secretly serving Admiral Amirius entered the room. "Your Excellency wants you to investigate the people around you for naturism sect believers and sink them all into the sea," the partner passed on Amirius's instructions. "All right." Bilt asked curiously, "What exactly happened?" "The naturism sect suffered a terrible blow since yesterday. His Excellency suffered an assassination attempt from the naturism sect yesterday. Miss Cynthia perished as a result. Secretary Luan was injured, and the Admiral lost many of his bodyguards," the partner described simply. "Ah!" Bilt was momentarily stunned. Aren't these the people Admiral Amirius mentioned to be careful of when acting in front of them? I even specially emphasized it to Gairman Sparrow. Now, Miss Cynthia is dead, Secretary Luan is injured, and Aston Revolt has been relieved of his position as Governor-General. The corners of Bilt's mouth twitched while he wore a blank expression. East Chester County, Stone City. Audrey silently listened to a noble lady's words, echoing her from time to time as she provided an ear to listen to. Towards the end, the noble lady praised her sincerely. "Audrey, you really are an angel. I feel a lot more comfortable after chatting with you." At this moment, Audrey saw the female priest from the Church of Evernight enter. Hence, she exchanged pleasantries before walking over with a smile. This priest appeared ordinary, as she only provided low-level preachings, but in fact, she was a secret member of the Psychology Alchemists. "Audrey, the potion formula is already in my hands. However, you need to contribute enough to obtain it," the female priest whispered while no one was paying attention. Audrey's eyes darted around slightly as she said, "That wouldn't be an issue. However, ma'am Smine, can you tell me its name?" The female priest looked around before saying with a suppressed voice, "Hypnotist." Chapter 633. 2 Types of Parasitizing. After leaving the Sweet Lemon Bar, Klein directly returned to his inn. Just as he was packing his luggage, the gigantic skeleton messenger appeared suddenly. It originally wanted to pat Klein on the shoulder, but it failed due to its nearly 4-meter-tall body with its head penetrating through the ceiling. All it could do was throw the letter ahead before collapsing into nothingness. "Mr. Azek has finally replied. It has almost been a week. Has the messenger been changed? It looks like the original one and would make the corresponding warning." Klein caught the letter and unfolded it. "I'm very sorry that I'm only replying to you today. Perhaps it's because the memories I've recovered has exceeded the limits of my body. I had to spend several days in a deep sleep to adapt to it. The matters you described does coincide with the traits of a marauder pathway. Their corresponding sequence 4 is parasite. In higher sequences, they possess the beyonder powers of parasitized bodies. According to what I know, there are 2 types of parasitizing. The first type is a preliminary state. The parasite would borrow the host's body to hide himself, so as to extend his lifespan and recover from his injuries. He can see and hear whatever the host sees and hears, but he is unable to interfere with the host's thoughts or steal his thoughts. Therefore, for a host to converse with a parasite, he will have to be the first to speak. The other is full control. The parasite is nearly fused with the host's spirit body, knowing and understanding his thoughts, as well as take over control of the body. Faced against the first type of parasite, one can inform the host via dreams or a subconscious conversation without worrying about being discovered by the parasite. This is because the parasite has to use the host's senses to sense his surroundings. For the second state, there is no way to converse with the host without the parasite's knowledge. However, there is a chance of eradicating the parasite, which is to rely on the host's faith. It's very difficult for me to accurately describe such matters, and all I can say is that when one opens his heart while praying, the target of the prayer would be able to discover the existence of the parasite, and through a particular ritual, provide feedback to complete the separation or eradication. Of course, the prerequisite is that the host himself doesn't know of this. Otherwise, the parasite would definitely be alerted and begin carrying out preventive measures. Isn't the latter situation somewhat similar to Little Sun's? He prayed to me without much thought, and I discovered the existence of Amon's avatar. Then, with a concealed goal, I taught him the secret deed ritual and used it to cleanse the parasite. Klein instantly had a deeper understanding of the previous situation he was in. However, I'm currently unable to determine which state my dear poet is in. Back in Tianjin, he would occasionally talk to himself. This might be a result of the first type of parasitic states, but the problem lies in the fact that it has been months. It's possible that the parasite has completed his complete control of Leonard. I have to first confirm the matter before knowing what I should do. Otherwise, rashly entering his dream will only lead to preemptively warning the parasite, making the problem more serious and harder to resolve. If it's the second parasitic state, my dear poet believes the goddess, but she has millions of believers. It's unlikely that she would pay important notice to a red glove who's neither a blessed or saint. She's unlike me, the fool. I read every prayer and often provide a one-to-one service. This is what it's like during a startup phase. As Klein thought over it, he suddenly sighed and felt wistful. He originally planned on entrusting a task to Emlyn to secretly monitor Leonard Mitchell to see if he often whispered to himself. However, after considering how Emlyn had already appeared before Leonard and the parasite because of Tinder, there was a high chance that he was a target they were wary of or a target of investigation. Therefore, he rationally abandoned such a thought. Miss Magician is only a sequence 8 and a trick master. She doesn't have the ability to monitor a parasite at the angel level or a red glove. Miss Justice's identity is the best form of concealment. Besides, she's also a believer of the goddess. But the problem lies in the fact that she's back in her fief. She will only return to Backlund in June. Mr. Hanged Man and Ma'am Hermit are at sea. As for Little Sun, there's no way for him to connect with the outside world. There's still not enough Tarot Club members. The factions they've expanded into are still lacking. I can't find any suitable person to help me complete this task. Among the people I know, Miss Sharon should be the best choice to perform such matters when it comes to concealment, but I have no way of contacting her, even if I do it through Miss Magician or Emlyn. Sigh, I had fled Backlund in a hurry, so I failed to consider many of the consequences. Klein raised his hand to knead his temples as he thought about how Leonard was an elite red glove in the Nighthawks. There were high-ranking deacons in the church watching over him, so it was unlikely the parasite would dare to do anything for now. Hence, he decided to put the matter aside and wait for a more suitable helper. Perhaps I can wait until I digest the potion and head east of the Sonia Sea to find mermaids. After I complete my advancement, I can return to Backlund and do it myself. The experienced Klein didn't hesitate further as he rapidly made up his mind. Inside Sweet Lemon Bar. After the uneasy Bilt handled 2 naturism sect believers among his close aides, he finally received some good news. Are you telling me that Admiral Emirius will be returning to Byam today? He stood up with a cigar in hand. Sothith nodded gently and said, His fleet left the harbor half an hour ago. It's steering towards the Rorstad archipelago. Phew. Bilt didn't conceal his sigh of relief, having confirmed that the Admiral wasn't putting any blame on him. Just the thought of how Gehrman Sparrow had managed to make the Admiral suffer the loss of so many of his bodyguards, the younger brother's loss of his position as Governor-General, the injury of his secretary, and the death of his mistress, he couldn't help but wonder about his own management capabilities. Although the responsibility of these matters wasn't necessarily Gehrman Sparrow's fault, to have them all happen at once had made one believe that it was the crazy adventurer's fault. At the very least, he was unlucky enough. And as his employer and endorser, Bilt believed that there was no way he could escape responsibility. He definitely needed to incur punishment from Admiral Emirius. His Excellency is indeed a demigod. He didn't let his rage blind his reason. Praise the Lord. May the storm be with us, Bilt said as he struck his right fist on his left breast. At this moment, the subordinates he sent rushed back. "Boss, Gehrman's sparrow has disappeared," the subordinate reported in a hurried tone. Bilt frowned slightly. "Disappeared?" "Yes." After he checked out of his room, he held his suitcase and circled the area several times before disappearing. The subordinate explained truthfully. "It's really difficult to monitor an adventurer who can shapeshift into anyone." Bilt sighed and said, "Leave it. There's no need to seek him out again." After being targeted by the Mother Tree of Desire, Klein cautiously changed his appearance and identity, as well as his place of residence to prevent anyone from targeting him. From the feedback received from acting as Admiral Emerius, he decided to quickly digest the potion by putting it into practice. While riding a carriage to the Oravi Hospice Foundation, Klein once again stepped in. The person in charge of the registration was still Ma'am Joanna. She looked up and asked, "You want to do volunteer work?" "Yes." Klein nodded seriously. Joanna took out a form and asked like clockwork, "Name?" Klein smiled and replied, "Sinbad Volunteer." The weather in Eastchester County during April was comfortable. The vegetation was lush and the scenery was beautiful. It was the perfect season for hunting. Audrey was dressed in a waist-fitting black riding suit with a helmet. She was on a burgundy mare that belonged to her, while in pursuit of a brightly colored wild chicken. She shot a whistling arrow and accurately struck the prey. As a psychiatrist, her physical attributes had clearly been enhanced. Together with her education in archery from a young age, whether it was in shooting firearms or in archery, she was considered rather skilled. A golden figure pounced forward and rapidly bit onto the prey which had lost its life. It was none other than Susie. "It's a pleasure working with you." The corners of Audrey's lips curled up as she struck her palm with Susie's paw with a smile. At this moment, the aristocrats surrounding her came over, either praising her for her hunting prowess or her training of her hunting hound. Audrey felt a little ashamed regarding the latter half. She had never trained Susie before. The aristocrats quickly dispersed as they continued chasing their prey. As for the low-level priest of the Evernight goddess, she came over and said to Audrey with a suppressed voice, "You can receive the hypnotist formula after completing the final mission." Finally. Audrey's eyes lit up as she silently nodded. To be frank, if she were still the green and squeamish noble lady of the past, she would have long lost the patience to accumulate the required contributions and would have ended up requesting the purchase of the hypnotist potion formula at the Tarot Club. But she knew very well that building up contributions would aid her infiltration into the psychology alchemists. She would be more trusted and build up a good foundation for her to receive the high-sequence potion formulas in the future. Therefore, she patiently performed matters that were either uninteresting or interesting. Of course, Audrey didn't waste the past 2 months. She had been eavesdropping on the conversations of the aristocrats and maidservants, before guiding them to pour out their frustrations and aid them in defeating their negative emotions. This allowed her to act as a psychiatrist very perfectly. During this process, she realized that she would unknowingly eavesdrop, observe, and steer the people around her, to understand their flaws and habitual thought processes. She believed that she could disadvantage or mentally break any one of them without leaving a mark. She could also get them to help her by their own will without them even realizing it. It has to be said that it's actually quite terrifying, just like monsters in the legends, who can grasp your minds. As she recalled, Audrey couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Smine was somewhat unaccustomed to horse riding as she carefully circled the area and said, "Stone University's Associate Professor Michelle is a collector. We wish for you to purchase a notebook from the 20-Year War." The 20-Year War referred to a war between the Lone Kingdom and Faysac Empire in the 5th Epoch's year 621 to 642. The former was defeated and lost the ancient Elves Island, which was present-day Sonia Island. Windblessed is indeed a sequence that can be easily acted based on its name. The only problem is that it occasionally makes me irascible, completely matching the characteristics of a gale. Alger sighed inwardly without any delight. Over the past 2 months or so, he had failed to obtain the Ocean Songster formula through his own resource channels and the Tarot Club's trades. After all, it was that of a sequence 5, the sequence closest to a demigod. The corresponding formula was already something where demand far outstripped supply. Even with boatloads of money and the willingness to pay a premium, it was very difficult to buy one. Normally speaking, joining the corresponding church or organization was the most effective method of obtaining the corresponding formula. But as a Church of Storm's bishop, Alger was unable to rely on this method. Due to particular secrets, he needed to hide his strength in order to win the freedom he needed to take action and be under light monitoring. Only after he had sufficient confidence would he head for a place and complete the goal he had been waiting for all this time. To his joy, he didn't waste the past 2 months. At the very least, the speed at which he digested the wind-blessed potion was pretty decent. The wind-blessed is simple. Ocean songster is said to be quite difficult. Must I frequently sing? Alger couldn't help but turn his head and look towards the deck. Although he was separated from them by several rooms, he could still hear the drunken sailors singing with gusto, creating a din that could rival the storm's roars. Alger unknowingly frowned. Backlund. Cherwood Borough. Synthus Circus. Ma'am, didn't you say that you're performing magic? Why are you dressed like that? A youth asked the woman dressed in a pitch-black pointed hat and dress of the same color in puzzlement. I don't know why I'm wearing this as well. Perhaps it's because of my first appearance here. My brain was freezing from the weather and my style was subsequently fixed. Furs rubbed her face, which had red and yellow paint, as she replied with a smile. In ancient times, magic is often mistaken as witchcraft. But this has nothing to do with why I'm wearing this. She picked up the middle of 3 porcelain cups which were placed in front of her. She then placed a white ball beneath it. Then, she quickly switched the positions of the cups before smiling at the youth who had questioned her. Guess where the tiny ball is? Isn't this one of the gambling methods invented by Emperor Roselle? The youth said with piqued interest. But you aren't a croupier, but a trick master at a circus. Therefore, I believe that the ball has already been switched away. All the cups are empty. Furs smiled and said, Congratulations, you got it wrong. She suddenly picked up the cup in the middle as a white blur flew out. It was a dove. As for the tiny ball from before, it was where the dove had left. Wow! Godly! Wonderful magic! Brilliant! After a series of amazed exclamations, Furs clearly looked pleased with herself as she looked at the distant cathedral bell, put away her props, and returned to the tent where the circus master resided. Are you really resigning? I can double your salary. The circus master came over as he tried to persuade her otherwise. Unfortunately, I had already summarized the trick master principles by the middle of March and had already completely digested the potion last week. If it wasn't because the contract ended today, I wouldn't even be here today. Although being a trick master feels very nice, this doesn't stop me from my goal of advancing to astrologer. Teacher said that he would be giving me the formula, ingredients, and a gift this week. What kind of gift will it be? Sigh, the ravings from the full moon are getting more terrifying. If not for Mr. Fool, I definitely would have lost control and become a monster. Furs extended her right hand and covered her mouth, languidly yawning. Then she said with a smile, Well, I'm actually a best-selling author. My next book is related to circuses, so I came here to be hired. A best-selling author? The circus master's eyes lit up as he said worriedly and expectantly, Will you write bad things about us? Are there any? I had a great time for the past 2 months. Furs took off her pointed black hat. The circus master revealed a sincere smile and said, Wall, ma'am, Wall, can you mention our circus's name in your book? I'll pay you advertisement fees. Of course, it won't be much. As you know, I'm responsible for the livelihoods of many people. That can be done? This circus master is quite smart. For the first time, Furs realized that a novel could advertise, just like in newspapers or magazines. Furthermore, the format was more obscure and natural. Amidst waves, a liner with rows of cannons traveled along a safe sea route without daring to deviate far from it. Any deviation from the sea route east of Oravi Island usually meant disappearing. Even pirates didn't dare to stray too far from the safe zones. This sea was filled with unexplored regions, filled with all sorts of sensational legends. After 2 months of volunteer work and finding 4 chances to engage in true acting, Klein bade farewell to carrying patients, scrubbing toilet bowls, cleaning vomit, and other miscellaneous chores. He boarded a ship headed for the Gargas archipelago. At the tarot gathering in early March, he had hired the hermit Katlia in a private conversation. He would meet her at the capital of Gargas archipelago, the city of White Naz. He would then board her ship and head for the dangerous ocean, which was close to an illusion, on the far east of the Sonia Sea. There, he would search for unaffiliated mermaids who lived there. The hermit Katlia seemed to be very interested in meeting members of the tarot club in the real world. With just a few seconds of thought, she agreed to the world's request. However, due to the high level of danger, she had given a high asking price. £3,000. Klein's first reaction was to give up and take Mr. Hangedman's ghost ship, but considering how there would be many sailors from the Church of Storms following him, making his freedom limited, and the fact that the level of danger in the easternmost area of the Sonia Sea was high, he finally accepted Ma'am Hermit's condition. As for her, she would wait around the Gargas archipelago for a month at the beginning of April. Any delay would imply the end of the cooperation. To not waste the £1,000 deposit, Klein didn't wait to complete his digestion before heading for Gargas archipelago from Oravi Island. Of course, with the summaries and chances at true acting from before, he was already very close to completely digesting the faceless potion. Even if he didn't use true acting, just acting in his capacity as Gehrman Sparrow was enough to complete the digestion in 2 to 3 weeks. Due to this reason, as well as the world's identity being tied with Gehrman Sparrow, Klein transformed back into the lunatic and powerful adventurer once he left the hospital. However, he did disguise himself to a certain degree. As he watched the perturbed sea surface, Klein finally saw a port city that had houses mainly made of white rock. The most eastern front of the Faysac Empire, the capital of the Gargas archipelago, Nas. I'm finally overseas. Klein looked at a fishing boat carrying whale meat cruising into the harbor. Its ruggedness wasn't concealed. Meanwhile, he discovered several ships hanging pirate flags docked at the harbor without any signs of concealment. Indeed, Oravi Island's eastern front is a playground for pirates. Klein wore his hat and carried his luggage and left the cabin after the liner came to a stable halt. He went down the gangway into the harbor. After a few steps, he saw a crew of pirates seemingly entering conflict with a local gang. Both sides drew their weapons as they clashed. Klein calmly walked past, showing no signs of stopping them. At that moment, he saw a local pull out a few cans from his pocket and open the lid before throwing it into the middle of the road. What's the meaning of this? Klein nearly laughed out before recalling an infamous item at sea. Canned wolf fish. Canned wolf fish was popular on the east coast of Faysac and the Gargas archipelago. Just as the thought surfaced, an indescribable stench seemed to inundate Klein's olfactory senses. His facial muscles twitched as he tried hard to resist his body's discomfort as he quickly left the region. A small number of pirates who were struck by the stench vomited immediately, while the remaining ones frantically fled while dragging their companions as though they had lost all their combat strength. A minute later, in a secluded corner, the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, crouched down and silently belched. Chapter 635. Meeting the smell of canned wolf fish is really pungent. Not only is it smelly, but it's also disgusting. It's practically a biological weapon. Klein crouched in the corner and took nearly a minute to recover. Before that very instant, he had underestimated canned wolf fish. He had failed to take the necessary actions to deal with the situation. He could have used paper figurine substitutes or create an invisible air tube to pretend that he was using underwater breathing, but he had done none of that. Now, he finally got a deep understanding of how wise it was to ban opening canned wolf fish in public. Phew! Klein exhaled as he slowly stood up. Carrying his suitcase, he slowly walked towards the harbor. His first impression of the city named Nas was one of many white houses, with stone being a common material for the buildings. The second impression was that it wasn't too far north, but the temperature was rather cold. Even though it was already April, it was still only a few degrees Celsius. The third impression was that there were many whaling houses. Gigantic beluga whales were being dismembered for their skin, flesh, fat, bones, and gray amber. The latter two could be used to make pannier for banquet dresses or top-grade scented materials. Whether it was for incense or perfume, they were considered luxurious goods that only the wealthy and nobles could enjoy. As for the skin, flesh, and fat of beluga whales, they also had their own uses. They were used separately to make clothes, food, or oil-related products. In Nas and the Gargas archipelago, the culinary methods for preparing beluga whale had transformed into a unique culture. There were all sorts of techniques in famous restaurants. Klein passed by the various whaling houses, seeing separated fat being carried out on cargo carriages towards nearby factories that spewed black smoke. They were oil refineries which were very unique to Gargas. Beluga whale fat could be refined into whale oil, which could be bottled and made into outstanding incendiary material and the lifeblood of particular industries. Very unique. Klein exhaled some mist as he stopped and watched for a while. Out of the harbor and into the city district, a cacophony of Fey Sac inundated his ears. Having mastered ancient Fey Sac, the source of the northern continent's language, Klein was long familiar with the language of the northern continent barbarians. He turned his head upon hearing the din and saw the tall populace with slightly blonde hair raising horizontal banners as they protested on the streets. The horizontal banner right at the front clearly wrote the reasons for their protest. Oppose the poaching of beluga whales. We need sustainable development. Klein nearly lost his cool as he believed that the concept of sustainable development was highly likely to be invented by Emperor Roselle. Raw beluga whale slices, fried whale steak, whale oil with skin, roasted whale meat. Like a standard traveler, Klein restaurant hopped thrice and sampled different food. Not bad. It's pretty unique and it's not very fishy. Instead, it's very appetizing and alluring. Burp. Klein covered his mouth as he came onto the streets. He discovered that the street lamps were sparse, but the lights from the houses lining the streets were bright. To a certain extent, they reduced the darkness of the night. Ice-cold winds passed through the ocean, causing Klein to raise his hand to prop up his collar. The blue cufflinks had their lusters restrained as they were deeply embedded at his wrists. Compared to rings, items like cufflinks were more suited to Gehrman Sparrow's persona. Therefore, Klein didn't blame the artisan for making changes without his permission. As for the harmonica that had fixed the summoning ritual of a spirit world creature, it matched Klein's inward intentions completely. It could be used for a year and a half. It was silver in color, exquisite and beautiful. When he received the harmonica, Klein had imagined such a scene, a crazy and powerful adventurer playing a sad tune on the harmonica in a silent night under the dark moonlight by the side of a boat. Unfortunately, the harmonica couldn't produce any sound, and it could only be used to summon Rionette Tinker. Shaking his head indiscernibly, Klein steadily walked down the empty and cold Nas streets before returning to his inn. Using sleep to bring himself back to an optimal state, he went to Grey Amber Street the next morning and entered a sundry store named Hot Whale Dance. Upon seeing the grizzled boss who was a head taller than him, Klein tapped the counter and said in Fey Sac, "Whale oil." The boss had wrinkles plastered across his face, but he only wore a coat made of beluga whale skin. The light-colored patterns had a strange beauty. "How much?" The boss was drinking large mouthfuls of liquor, ignoring the messy placement of the goods. 1¼ buckets, Klein replied according to the predetermined secret password. The boss's drinking actions instantly slowed down as he placed the cup of brownish-green alcohol onto the bar counter. "Do you want to try some? It's many times purer than Nepos. It's considered the mistress of all Fey Sac men. This was a distilled liquor that's a specialty of Fey Sac. It's brewed with potatoes or grain. The alcohol purity was high, as stimulating and famous as Blaze. Compared to Sonia blood wine, its price was rather low, and it was well liked by ordinary Phasacians. There's no need." Klein shook his head. The boss chuckled. "What kind of man are you if you don't drink Nepos? Are there only women in Lone?" He mumbled before drinking another mouthful. "Who introduced you here?" "Ma'am Gurmises," Klein said, a name in the style of the local customs. The boss exhaled, causing a strong scent of distilled liquor to linger in the air. He staggered as he got up, like a polar bear performing at a circus. After giving the store employee instructions, he brought Klein to a tiny room on the second story of the warehouse at the back. "Let me search for it." "Let's see," the boss mumbled as he crouched. Klein controlled the twitching of his facial muscles as he recalled a widely spread joke in the Lone Kingdom. When is a Fey Sac man not drunk? When he's in his mother's womb. After waiting for a moment, Klein saw the boss find a pure crystal ball from his rummaging. Then the tipsy polar bear had his back facing Klein as he rubbed his hands on it, softly chanting the tongue-twisting ancient Hermes. The room gradually turned dark as all the corners without light sank like they were producing a strange attractive force. The crystal ball quickly lit up, producing the figure of a woman wearing a black, classic robe. She had an oval face and had very fair skin. Her eyes were deep black with a slight purple hue which was filled with mystery. "I'm seeing another Tarot Club member's actual appearance again." Klein stepped forward and received the crystal ball. On the opposite end of the crystal ball, the hermit Catlia could also clearly see the world. He had black hair and brown eyes, with a thin and angular face. Her gaze paused for a moment before she hesitantly said, "Gehrman Sparrow?" She discovered that the true strength and standards of the Tarot Club members were far stronger than she had expected. The world was actually the crazy hunter, Gehrman Sparrow, who was considered at the level of a pirate admiral. My various assumptions of the world were problematic. Controlled, staid, experienced, and ruthless. Admiral of Stars didn't feel overly surprised. "Yes, Ma'am Catlia." Klein gestured for the boss to leave the room. After it became extremely quiet, Admiral of Stars Catlia asked once again, "I'm very curious. How did you recognize my identity?" "I've been very careful when participating in the gatherings." Of course, she had jumped in fright when the world, who had chosen to speak privately with her, immediately greeted her with Admiral of Stars. And it was partly because of this that she chose to take on the world's commission. A secret. Klein smiled politely. As he didn't wish for her to make connections to Mr. Fool, he calmly added, "Your eyes are very special. Can I understand that as a form of praise?" Catlia smiled, feeling somewhat enlightened. She believed that the world had previously only relied on her eyes and other details to suspect that she was Admiral of Stars, but she wasn't certain. Hence, he had probed her with language, and her reaction told him the correct answer. Klein didn't respond as he switched to asking, "When can we set off?" Chapter 636. Slaughterer Admiral of Stars Catlia thought before answering, "Tonight at 8. Dock 6. Not bad. There's no delay at all." Klein nodded slightly. "Okay." Just as he said that, the light inside the crystal ball suddenly converged as the figure dressed in a black, classic robe darkened and blurred before quickly vanishing. Holding the crystal ball which had turned very ordinary, Klein turned around, pulled open the door and walked out. Glancing at the boss who was guzzling alcohol while leaning against a wall, he threw the crystal ball at him. The boss fumbled to catch it as Klein unhurriedly walked down the stairs and left the warehouse. Once he was out of Hot Whale Dance, he took out his golden pocket watch and snapped it open to check the time. It's almost noon. Most bars will be open. Klein stopped a rental carriage and used Faceac to tell the driver to head to the Lairdal Bar. It meant Dawn Bar in the local language. It was a place where adventurers would gather in the Gargas archipelago. To Klein, the gathering of different intel and news was meaningful. This might aid him in making the best judgment at critical points in time, allowing him to escape the misfortune of losing his life. Therefore, even if he didn't like bars, he often went there. He would get a cup of thick malt beer and silently sit in the corner of the bar counter and listen to any matters of interest which people mentioned at sea. In addition, he wanted to know about Roy King, who had been imprisoned in Byam's Governor-General's office. Over the past 2 months, Snake of Mercury Willow Septon hadn't sent him any dreams. Similarly, Fate Counselor Ricardo didn't summon his messenger to provide him any clues to a powerful mystical item. About 20 minutes later, the carriage came to a halt. A huge vertical signboard with the words Lairdal Bar appeared before Klein's eyes. He habitually took out 2 Solian notes and handed them to the carriage driver. It was only when he saw the worn face of the carriage driver did he suddenly realize something. He was overseas and this was a colony of Faceac. It had its own currency. The smallest denomination was the kopeck, followed by the Fey silver, and then the gold horn. They maintained the very intuitive base 10 denomination, making conversions very simple. I forgot to visit the bank to exchange for kopeck and Fey silver. I used it all at the inn and restaurant. Klein was just about to look around to see if there were any banks around when the carriage driver happily received the 2 1 Soli notes. After repeatedly checking it, he beamed with his wrinkled face. Thank you for your generosity." Klein got off the carriage. While walking towards the Lairdal Bar, he was recalling the carriage driver's delighted look. Gold pounds, Soli, and pence can be used here as well? Yes, Gargas Archipelago isn't that far from Toscarter and Oravi. Many items would be sold here, and many lone adventurers like to visit the Sea of Beluga whales. To have Lone Kingdom's currency being used in private is rather common. Heh. Lone's industry and economic strength is greater than the Faceac Empire. It can even be said to be much stronger. The gold pound is worth a lot more than the gold horn. Wait. Suddenly, he recalled something. 1 gold pound could be used to exchange for 5 5 gold horn. This also meant that 2 soli was equal to 5. 5 fey silver. And in the City of White, a rental carriage cost 4 fey silver an hour. There wasn't any prorated discounts. It was no wonder the carriage driver was so happy. Klein turned back and realized that the carriage had long disappeared. Sigh. Gently exhaling, Klein pressed down on his hat and pushed open the heavy wooden door before entering the Lardal bar. In this world, bars near the dock and factory districts often sold lunch and dinner. Therefore, they opened around 11 in the morning. At that moment, there were quite a number of adventurers, who had nothing better to do, gathered in front of the bar counter. They ordered liquor and smoked fish or vegetable soup with oil floating on the surface. They had a great time eating all of that with bread. Drinking Lanti-proof and Nepos at noon? Are they planning to be drunk the entire day? The customs of Fey Sac are really unacceptable. Klein mumbled as he walked to the bar counter with a deadpan expression. He sat in a corner and rapped the wooden counter. 2 toasted bread with red sausage, a set of smoked whale meat, a bowl of thick vegetable soup, and a cup of Gaulis beer. Gaulis beer was rather popular along the eastern seaboard of Fey Sac. It was rather rare in Sonia Island and the Gargas archipelago. New here. The bartender glanced at Klein. A total of 4 fey silver and 6 kopek. I'm new because I don't drink liquor? Klein ignored the bartender's question and threw 2 soli in notes. It was equivalent to 5 fey silver and 5 kopek. Considering how he was Gehrman's sparrow, Klein held back the urge to get the bartender to give him change as he treated it as a tip. Of course, in a Backlund bar, that amount of food would have cost him about 2 soli. Having received a tip, the bartender didn't ask further. He skillfully poured a cup of Gaulis beer and pushed it towards Klein. The beer was rather black in color with plenty of foam. It had a pleasant charred taste, and there was slight stimulation in the mellow taste. It made Klein feel as though the alcohol content was rather high as he suspected if some other liquor had been poured in. While waiting for his food, he sipped his beer and silently listened to the conversations of the surrounding adventurers. And the group's conversation was mainly centered around how someone had made a windfall, who was killed by pirates, who finished off a pirate captain without claiming the bounty and instead inherited the deceased pirate captain's subordinates, which woman in Nas had an illegitimate child, or who became a laughingstock for failing to perform at a brothel. When the Gargas specialty, thick soup brewed using sweet vegetables, onions, cabbage, carrots, fish, and butter, was served before Klein, he finally heard something interesting. An adventurer suppressed his voice as he said to his surroundings partners, "Have you heard of this? There's a 4th epoch ruin east of Gargas." "No." "Who discovered it?" his surprised partner curiously asked. The adventurer looked to his left and right as he said without much thought, "Gareth discovered it. As you know, he's a seafarer who's good at diving. As he was drunk, he was thrown off the deck and sank to the bottom of the sea. Who knew that he ended up discovering remnants of steel buildings? They were definitely steel buildings made from human hands." "And then?" his partner pressed. The adventurer chuckled. Gareth followed the ruins and discovered an abandoned sea well of unknown depths. It was already filled with seawater, but it still left him with extreme horror. Holy Lord of Storms, this might even lead to the core of the land. He said that there was something summoning him inside, but he didn't dare explore it. So he floated up in fear. A deep sea well. Strange attraction. This might not be a 4th epoch ruin. Perhaps it's from the 3rd epoch or 2nd epoch. Little Sun had mentioned that during the Dark Epoch, sea monsters were subject to Elf King Saniathrim and helped him rule the bottom of the sea. Sweet, salty, and a little tartish. Klein drank a mouthful of thick vegetable soup as he forked a piece of smoked beluga whale meat. The adventurers didn't talk about Gareth's encounter, as there wasn't any sight of heart-stirring gold or jewelry, mystical items, or beyonder ingredients at the moment. The conversation quickly steered to a few adventurers who they weren't friendly with. They mocked about how they had married beautiful natives who all turned into stout and fat women a couple of years later. Their strength could even match those of low-sequence beyonders. Finally, they concluded that it might have to do with how people from Fey Sac had tiny bits of giant blood running in their veins. They didn't say anything of value until Klein finished his lunch and drank his beer, but the number of people inside Lardal bar kept increasing. Suddenly, the heavy door was pushed open as it slammed into the wall. A top hat-donning young man who was clearly of lone blood rushed in. He shouted nervously, "Is there anyone from the Adventure Association?" "Yes, built still owes me the creation of one item. Klein watched as the young men looked around frantically while constantly turning his head back. It appeared as though someone was pursuing him. Before he could consider whether to render assistance, 3 adventurers stood up from different corners. One of them was more than 2 meters tall. He had wide shoulders and firm muscles. His hair was slightly blonde, and his eyes were a deep blue. He was rather eye-catching. The strength he appears to have matches with his substance. This isn't a beyonder of quite a significant sequence. Klein retracted his gaze as he became a spectator once again as he looked out the door. Soon, a man in a linen shirt and brown jacket appeared. He was of medium build, and his lips were purple. His brown eyes could hardly conceal the intense baneful look he tried to hide. Klein instantly connected the man to a portrait on a bounty. It was the second mate of the King of Immortality Agolito, Slaughter Curtius, with a bounty of 9,500 pounds. This is a notorious pirate. Klein's nerves tensed up as his gaze locked onto the man. He naturally hung his left hand down as his body prepared to lunge forward. Curtius swept his gaze at the 2-meter-tall giant, and saw Klein before retracting his gaze. He turned to leave the ladle bar without stopping at all. Very decisive, very alert. Klein frowned slightly, confident that he hadn't revealed any killing intent. He had even controlled his gaze very well. Was he worried about that giant? Or is his intuition very sharp to a particular extent? Just like the premonition towards danger like devils? Klein wondered as he drank the remaining Gaullus beer without participating in the private conversations of the Adventurer Association members. He left the bar and came onto the streets. Now, he didn't wish to give himself new troubles aside from finding mermaids. After circling the area, Klein discovered that Slaughterer Curtius had long departed. His whereabouts were unknown. Hence, he silently returned to his inn. City of Silver. Inside the spire, Derek Berg once again met the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad. He clearly remembered that nearly 70 days ago, Colin had told him that in 2 months he should prepare to be sent out on an exploration mission. Chapter 637. The Future. Are you done with your preparations? Colin had his back to the window as he asked without any abnormality in his tone. With the axe of Hurricane attached to him, Derek lowered his head slightly. I'm done. In the past 2 months, through the patrol missions and arduous practice, he had fully mastered the various beyonder powers of Solar High Priest. He was already not too far from digesting the potion. What he wished for the most was to obtain the Sun Pathway Sequence 6 potion formula in the next 2 to 3 tarot gatherings, so as to ensure his continual advancement. The release of Shepherd Lovia made him feel highly threatened. He believed that only by reaching the same Sequence 5 would he have a chance of effectively putting her in check and avert the potential danger of the City of Silver. However, with the knowledge of the acting method and without the lack of beyonder ingredients, all he needed to do was survive the various patrols and exploration missions and make enough contributions to make Sequence 6 a reachable target. However, Sequence 5 required a specific ritual which made it relatively difficult. The grizzled Colin nodded. In another 2 days, I'll be leading a small team to the vicinity of the Giant King's court. We will do a second sweep of Afternoon Town which we previously found, and your powers are very suitable for such matters. Afternoon Town. Having been brushing up on his knowledge of legends over the past few months, Derek was no stranger to this name. It was an area that needed to be passed when going to the Giant King's court from the Kingdom of Silver. It was a town where humans and giants lived together. It clustered around the ancient god's residence which was forever fixed at sunset, just like the last door that separated the real world to a mythological legend. Yes, Your Excellency. Derek couldn't find a reason to reject. City of White, Nas. In a particular inn. Klein sat behind a desk as he looked at the constantly changing clouds outside the window, silently awaiting the arrival of evening. At 8, he would board the Star Pirates' flagship, Future, on Dock 6 to head to the furthest eastern front of the Sonia Sea. No matter what happened in the Gargas archipelago or this region of the sea known as a pirate's playground, they would have nothing to do with him. Therefore, he didn't attempt to hunt the small number of pirates with bounties on their heads that he met while walking in the big and small alleys or bars and casinos. He didn't want to mess up his plans of finding mermaids. My spiritual intuition tells me that Slaughter Curtius from Noon seems to have targeted me. I wouldn't mind if he wishes to send himself to his death. Well, battle strategy can be despised, but battle technique needs to be treated seriously. Without using the sea god's scepter or tinder, I'm at best a little stronger than him. I'm at an advantage by being well-rounded and strange enough. Klein half closed his eyes as he imagined the gathering of countless spherical lights, and he used it to enter cogitation rapidly so as to maintain the acuteness of his spirituality. After an unknown period of time, his spiritual perception was triggered as he opened his eyes immediately. At that moment, the sun had already set in the west. The fiery red color seemed to burn the sea as long shadows were drawn out through the curtains. The shadows seemed to come alive as they danced about before distorting and standing up to project themselves on the wall. Its pitch-black darkness was like the manifestation of the immense evil at the bottom of a human's heart. Klein watched this scene with a deadpan expression. He raised his left palm high as he slowly extended his fingers. The pitch-black shadow produced a voice that sounded hoarse, as though it held sandcloth in it. While looking at Klein it said, "Gehrman Sparrow, do not interfere in the matter that happened this afternoon. This is the will of the King of Immortality." With that said, the shadow slid down like flowing water and scattered into the darkness, having its original state restored. Klein didn't pay attention to the shadow's changes. Instead, he cast his gaze outside. He could sense that the person controlling the shadow was somewhere across the street. Hence, he didn't plan on acting upon an incorporeal entity. Indeed, Slaughterer Curtius recognized me as the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, who loves to hunt pirates. That's why he didn't hesitate to turn around at noon. He might not be afraid of me, but there was another rather powerful adventurer present as well. The power he revealed just now is somewhat similar to the Desire Apostle in Backlund. He's more and more likely to be a beyonder from the devil pathway. Heh, using the King of Immortality to scare me. Do you think I'll submit just like that? I never intended to involve myself in it. By doing so, I'm actually a little curious. Forget it. Finding the mermaids is of utmost importance as of now. I shouldn't create incidents for myself. Klein retracted his gaze as he lampooned. He was originally wondering if he should report the matter to the Church of the God of Combat in Nas, but after serious consideration, he discovered that it was likely to be meaningless. The Church of the God of Combat is the only legal religion in the Feysak Empire. The number of high-sequence beyonders they have is definitely a little higher than the Church of the Evernight Goddess, but just by a little. Even if the demigods of the Feysak royal family and military are added, with the extensive land and numerous colonies it has, making the number of critical areas that require protection crucial, they would definitely be lacking in manpower. However, this didn't deter it from cruising calmly on the Black Sea surface as it headed for the lighthouse which emitted its light. As the sailboat approached, the flag gradually became clear. The crimson but weak moonlight allowed the people at the harbor to see 10 white stars of the same size as they circled a cold eyelashless eye on the flag. Admiral of Stars. The future. The pirates and sailors who were watching over their ships exclaimed as every dock in the harbor was filled with stirred emotions. After more than 10 seconds, the defensive cannons on the two ends of the mountain nervously adjusted themselves and aimed at the gigantic sailboat which didn't conceal itself. Clang, clang, clang. The distant cathedral produced light and ethereal chimes, signaling that it was 8 o'clock sharp. As the tenseness around the dock became more evident, the future came to a halt. At some point in time, a woman dressed in a black classical robe appeared at the bow. Her clothes were filled with different symbols and magic labels, making her look like a powerful warlock of ancient legends. Under the crimson moonlight, the ground beneath her suddenly lit up. Resplendent starlight scattered down, forming a long transparent bridge. The long bridge constantly extended forward before landing on Dock 6. An impressive show. As expected of one of the 7 pirate admirals. Furthermore, she's a full admiral, a rank higher than Iceberg and Ailment. Klein sighed as he wished to extend his palm to cover his face. He didn't wish to let others know that the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, was cooperating with Admiral of Stars Katlia. At this point, I can only maintain my persona. Once I'm done digesting the potion and by the time I'm back in the northern continent, there wouldn't be Gehrman Sparrow anymore. Klein walked out of the shadows as he pressed the half-top hat on his head. He smoothly walked onto the starry bridge. His footsteps were firm as Klein walked with his back straight while being targeted by numerous defensive cannons. Under the gazes with ambiguous meanings, he unhurriedly walked to the docked future. The bridge under his feet was transparent as the dark blue seawater which was almost black-ebbed beneath him. It would make anyone with acrophobia turn limp. Thankfully, I've long become a clown. I've even jumped off a clock tower. Klein covered the last 10 meters with a cold expression before stepping onto the deck of the future. Faced with the black-eyed Admiral of Stars Katlia, who had purple tint to her eyes, he didn't show any nervousness. He took off his hat and bowed. "Good evening, ma'am." Chapter 638. Poison expert. While Klein bowed, the purple tint in black-haired Katlia's eyes converged as they seemed to turn into an abyss that could suck up souls. What already exuded an air of mystery had turned even more obvious. She saw that the astral projection deep inside Gehrman Sparrow's ether body was pure darkness. In minute areas, there were dark flows with unending changes. She saw that Gehrman Sparrow's left hand was bright and lustrous, but it was stained with a sanguine color that couldn't be dispersed. She saw a blue luster by Gehrman Sparrow's wrist and a silver flow on his left pocket. The colors were bright and obvious as though they were connected to the illusory, stacked spirit world. There was the sound of the tide and the illusory sounds of wind surrounding the items. She saw an intermix of green and black lusters by Gehrman Sparrow's right pocket, as well as 2 points of golden, silver, and bronze under his armpit. At his chest, there was a deep grayish-white like rotting death. For mystical items and beyonder artifacts or spirituality charms in units of 10. Katlia's eyes were a little dazzled as she couldn't help but close them for a moment. She nodded as well. "Good evening, Mr. Sparrow." Even as a powerhouse who was famous across the seas, a senior member of the 7 pirate admirals, she seldom saw people who armed themselves to the teeth with beyonder items. Of course, she had also seen people with more mystical items, beyonder artifacts, and spirituality charms, but they had secret organizations backing them. They typically had several ships and more than 1,000 pirates under them. Many things needed to be turned in, split and shared, as well as sold in order to maintain and strengthen one's faction. Few things could be left in their possession as a result. However, few was relative. They could compare with what Gehrman Sparrow presently had, but Katlia had reduced her items to only 2 after several trades. They were 2 items that were sufficiently powerful and mystical enough to match her identity as a pirate admiral. Apart from the lusters representing different items, Katlia's black eyes, which were slightly purple, could also tell that Gehrman wasn't real enough. He seemed to be hidden behind thick curtains. This is the reason why he gives me the feeling like he's not a living person at the Tarot Club? He has quite a number of secrets. It involves at least a sequence 3 saint or an even higher level angel. Katlia didn't dare take another look as the glow in her eyes were no longer as profound. Meanwhile, she mocked herself, believing that some of her guesses about the world and Gehrman Sparrow were somewhat funny. Involves a sequence 3 saint or an even higher-leveled angel. Heh, there's nothing wrong with that, since he's like me, a member of the Tarot Club. We're definitely involved with Mr. Fool, who's likely a reawakened ancient god. After exchanging greetings, Katlia didn't engage in further small talk. She led Klein towards the cabin. At this moment, the future, which had been docked, set sail again. A long contour was drawn on the surface of the sea as it cruised east of the whale fishing route. With that, the tense atmosphere at the Nas harbor dispersed. Gazes from various sailors were cast over. Klein didn't show any signs of pressure as he surveyed the area and said with a tone as though he was back in his own home, "There are fewer people than I expected." Katlia turned her head and glanced at him before answering simply, "East of the whaling route is very dangerous. Only Ludwell heads there frequently as though he's searching for something. Apart from the future, the pirate crew's other ships wouldn't join us. Similarly, a large number of sailors have been placed on the other ships. Only the minimum number needed to guarantee the successful voyage of the ship has been maintained." A very wise choice. Ludwell. That Admiral Hell Ludwell? Mr. Hanged Man mentioned him a long time ago. He said that he was beginning to study Sonia Sea's eastern end of the navigation. Klein nodded a little without a word. This was Gehrman Sparrow's bearing. He silently observed his surroundings and realized that the deck, the cabin, and spars were covered with mysterious and abstract symbols. As a whole, it looked like a gigantic ritualistic magic ceremony. It's like the Golden Dream. It's a sailboat of mystery, but it's not at the level of a ghost ship. Compared to Admiral of Stars and Vice Admiral Iceberg, Tracy, who has only become a pirate admiral for the past few months, clearly is considerably more inferior. The Black Death has nothing special about it. Klein retracted his gaze and followed Katlia to the cabin's entrance. Waiting here was a man in dungarees and a white shirt. He was in his 30s and looked strong and fit. He had thick body hair. As for his forearm, which was exposed outside, it seemed like he was donning a brown sweater. He wore a circular hair with a depression in the middle as he revealed a smile and stretched out his right hand. The first mate of the future, Frank Lee. Good evening, Mr. Sparrow. Poison expert Frank Lee, who has a bounty of 7,000 pounds. Klein instantly recognized the man. Considering how Gehrman Sparrow didn't have the habit of shaking hands, he bent his back slightly and said, "Good evening." Frank Lee retracted his right hand and glanced at Katlia. He said while maintaining his smile, "You seem to know me?" "That's right. The picture I took before is on my arrest warrant. Don't mind the poison expert title. I'm a very friendly person, as long as I'm not facing those darn bastards. My greatest hobby is to study soil and figure out crossbreeding techniques. Believe me, this is the future of humanity." But the people from the Church of Mother Earth don't believe him. Katlia gave Klein an introduction in the most subtle manner. He's originally someone from the Church of Mother Earth? Crossbreeding techniques are good. As long as the quantity rises, it will be able to provide for more humans, raising the poverty line. Klein looked at Frank Lee, and he calmly said courteously and truthfully, "This is something commendable. You are indeed an adventurer who doesn't share the viewpoint of the common man. Excellent. Excellent. There are just too few people like you." Frank Lee's blue eyes revealed a clear look of pleasant surprise. "I've only tried crossbreeding a bull, a cow, and wheat together, allowing calves to be born like wheat. For that, I was almost sent to court by the Church of Mother Earth. My benevolent mother, they don't understand your true will at all. Crossbreeding a bull, a cow, and wheat. You devil." Only then did Klein realize that his understanding of crossbreeding techniques was different from what Frank Lee was talking about. He maintained a stoic expression without providing any further explanation. Under the lead of Frank Lee, who was reeling in a sudden bout of enthusiasm, Klein walked through the corridor beside Katlia. After stepping on the steps and arriving at a higher level, Klein's spiritual perception stirred as he cast his gaze to a shadow beside him. A figure grew out of the distorted darkness, a thin and tall but pale figure. His cheeks were nearly transparent, and his nose bridge was disharmonious and tall. His entire being gave off a sickly feeling. "This is the second mate of the future, Heath Doyle," Frank Lee introduced with a smile. "Bloodless Heath, whose bounty is higher than yours at 7,600 pounds? Klein quickly matched the face to the correct bounty notice. Heath nodded as a greeting before receding back into the shadows. "He's a Rose Bishop." When turning around to head for the captain's cabin, Frank Lee warmly mentioned Heath Doyle's situation. "You are telling me your second mate sequence directly?" Klein nearly pricked his brows. He secretly glanced at Katlia and discovered her masked exasperation. "Are you puzzled and worried that he's a devout believer of the true creator, a lunatic who has been tainted?" "No, haha. He's a lucky fellow." Due to an incident, the ordinary hymn was scattered with the potion concocted from a Rose Bishop's Beyonder ingredients. The potion seeped into him, bit by bit, and he survived the ordeal. Finally, he became quite a special Beyonder. As he didn't experience the listener stage, he wasn't tainted, nor did he become a lunatic. As long as he doesn't proactively use the Beyonder power, he remains an ordinary person, Frank Lee said in a flaunting tone. What an enviable fellow. He reached sequence 6 in one go. Furthermore, he didn't turn mentally unstable like the sea serpent, Calvetua. Klein sighed silently as he watched Admiral of Stars open the door to the captain's cabin. Katlia pointed inside. "Your room is diagonally across from here. Frank will send you over. If there's anything, you can come to me directly. You can have your meals at the dining hall at any time. You can also get Frank to send someone to bring food to your room. What you choose is dependent on your preference." Admiral of Stars does things in a very clear and direct manner. Yes, she's a mature and wise lady. Klein praised inwardly as he replied without a change in expression. Okay. He took this opportunity to glance at the layout of the captain's cabin, discovering that it contained a bookshelf, a full-body mirror, a table, and a carpet. She actually reads. Isn't she unable to digest all the information the hidden sage imbues in her? Klein thought in amusement. At this moment, having seen their conversation come to an end, Frank Lee passionately promoted, "Mr. Sparrow, would you like a serving of roasted potatoes tonight? When you chew it, it's like beef and its taste is like beef, but it's certainly potatoes." "Will I get sick eating that?" Klein answered coldly. "I don't eat supper." "All right then." Frank Lee drooped his shoulders and was just about to lead Klein to his room. Katlia suddenly thought of something and said, "Mr. Sparrow, you've likely hunted quite a number of enemies and have received several spoils of war. I'm curious about the number of beyonder characteristics you have left. Perhaps they can be used to reduce the remaining price of the trip." Klein considered for a moment and answered frankly, "Most of them have been sold. There's interrogator, pugilist, and lunatic left." He didn't mention the all-black eye or the beyonder characteristic of nightmare. He really is the most famous adventurer during the past few months. Even after selling most of them, he still has 3 sets of beyonder characteristics. Katlia sighed inwardly as she pondered. "I want pugilist." She had a warrior subordinate from the Gargas archipelago who had long made enough contributions to apply for an advancement. You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.